Listen closely, my children, for the wind carries stories that the heart must never forget. Many years ago, in a village tucked between green hills, lived a young man named Obinna. He was a pillar of strength with hands hardened by farm work and a heart as clear as a spring. His father, Pa Joel, was an aging man whose back was bent by years of poverty. The day came when Obinna received a visa to work in a great city far across the ocean. On his final night, under the silver glow of the moon, Obinna knelt before his father. "Papa," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I am going so that you may never taste hunger again. Every kobo I earn, every single salary, I will send back home to you. I will live like a beggar so you can live like a king." Pa Joel placed a trembling hand on his son's head, offering a blessing that seemed holy. The villagers gathered the next morning, praising Obinna's rare loyalty as he carried his small bag toward the dusty road. But as the bus pulled away, Pa Joel watched his son disappear into the distance with a strange, chilling smile that no one noticed. The city abroad was not the paradise Obinna had imagined. It was a place of gray stone and biting cold that seeped into his very bones. To keep his promise, Obinna took a job at a massive, noisy factory, working double shifts until his eyes grew heavy and his muscles screamed in protest. He lived in a tiny, windowless room that smelled of damp wood, sharing a single mattress with 2 other laborers. While others went to parties or bought fine clothes, Obinna wore a threadbare jacket and ate only plain rice and watery beans. Every month, with a heart full of pride, he stood in long lines at the wire transfer office. He would watch the teller process his entire paycheck, leaving himself with barely enough to pay his meager rent. "My father is resting now," he would tell himself as he walked home through the freezing rain. "He is eating well because of my sweat." Back in the village, the notification arrived. Pa Joel clutched the money tightly, his eyes gleaming with a sudden, dark hunger. Instead of buying the medicine he claimed to need, he dressed in his finest old lace and walked straight toward the marketplace. The marketplace was bustling with people when Pa Joel arrived, but he did not go to the grain sellers or the butchers for a simple meal. Instead, he headed to the center of the square where the elders and titled men gathered to drink. With a loud, booming voice that surprised everyone, he ordered the most expensive palm wine for every person sitting under the shade of the great Irako tree. "Drink, my friends," he shouted, throwing crisp notes onto the table. "My son is a giant in the white man's land. He sends me more money in a month than you all see in a year." The villagers were stunned. They watched as the man who used to beg for seeds now distributed wealth like a traditional ruler. Every night, the sound of loud music and laughter echoed from his compound as he hosted lavish feasts for strangers and sycophants who only wanted his money. He spent hours at the back of the market, betting large sums on card games and cockfights, losing and winning with a reckless grin. One evening, a wise village elder named Matsuokoro pulled him aside. "Joel," the old man whispered, his eyes full of concern, "this wealth you flaunt comes from the marrow of your son's bones. Money sent with such sacrifice carries spirits of truth. Be careful how you treat it." Pa Joel only laughed, splashing wine on the ground in mockery. With the steady flow of Obinna's hard-earned cash, Pa Joel decided he needed a dwelling that matched his new status. He hired builders from the city to construct a flashy mansion right in the heart of the village. It was a house of many colors, with golden gates and high walls that towered over the humble huts of his neighbors. People began to bow when he passed, addressing him as chief, even though he had no traditional title. He bought a large, noisy generator that ran all night, just to show everyone he could afford the fuel. While Obinna was sleeping on a cold floor in a crowded room, his father was sleeping on imported silk sheets in a room larger than a classroom. One afternoon, a neighbor approached the gate to admire the house. "You are truly blessed, chief," the neighbor said. "Your son Obinna is a godsend. He must be a very great man over there to afford all this for you." Pa Joel leaned against his golden gate, took a long drag from his pipe, and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching underfoot. The words he spoke next would have broken his son's heart. "A son abroad," Pa Joel said, his voice dripping with sudden cruelty, "is nothing more than a goat tied in your backyard. If you pull the rope, he must come. If you squeeze the udder, he must give milk forever." The crowd of hangers-on around him erupted into laughter, clapping their hands at his wit. Pa Joel continued, emboldened by the cheers. "Obinna is not a great man. He is a weak boy who exists only to serve my greatness. He sends the money because I am his master. Why should I save it? He is young. His hands are still strong enough to work until I am buried." He spent the rest of the evening making jokes about how easy it was to manipulate a child who was blinded by duty. The villagers laughed along, but some felt a cold shiver down their spines at the old man's heartlessness. A young boy named Namdi, who was hiding behind a pillar waiting for a scrap of food, heard every single word. He looked at the mansion and then at the mocking face of the old man. He remembered Obinna's kind face from years ago and tucked those cruel words deep into his memory for a later day. Thousands of miles away, the winter was particularly harsh. Obinna sat in his small room, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His boots had holes in them, and he had been eating nothing but bread and tea for 3 days to ensure he could send the full amount home for the community project his father had mentioned in his last letter. Despite his shivering frame, Obinna smiled as he looked at a small, faded photograph of his father. "Papa must be so comfortable now," he whispered to the empty, dark room. "Maybe the mansion is finished, and he has a soft bed to rest his old bones. It is worth it. Every hunger pain is worth his comfort." He felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of homesickness. It had been 7 long years since he smelled the red earth of his village or heard the laughter of his kin. On an impulse, driven by a deep need for love, he decided to use his small emergency savings, the only money he had ever kept for himself, to buy a plane ticket. He would not call. He would not write. Just as the sun began to set, a heavy knock sounded at the Golden Gate. A man with a cold face and 2 large guards stood there. The moneylender had come for his first payment. The moneylender, a man named Mr. Silas, walked into the mansion as if he already owned it. He looked at the expensive paintings and the gold-plated furniture with a calculating eye. "Chief," he said with a mock bow, "your reputation for wealth is known far and wide, but my pockets are empty, and your debt is full." Pa Joel straightened his robe, trying to maintain his mask of power. "Do not worry, Silas. My son is a billionaire in the white man's land. He is sending a special shipment of funds as we speak. In 3 days you will have your money and extra for your troubles." To maintain the illusion, Pa Joel ordered his servants to bring out the finest wine for the moneylender. He acted as though the debt was a minor inconvenience, a small pebble in the path of a giant. The villagers who watched from the fence were green with envy, seeing their chief treat a dangerous man like a common servant. They had no idea that the mansion was a hollow shell, held together by lies and the vanishing sweat of a son who was currently boarding a plane with a heart full of hope. As soon as the moneylender left, the mask of the chief fell away, revealing a panicked, desperate old man. Pa Joel paced the length of his marble hallway, his breath coming in short gasps. He scrambled to hide the evidence of his ruin, shoving gambling slips into the fireplace and ordering his servants to stop talking about the debts to anyone in the market. "If the village finds out I am broke, the respect will vanish," he hissed at his head servant. "And if Obinna hears of this, he might stop sending the money." He spent the night writing a frantic letter to his son, inventing a fake story about a sudden village tax and an emergency surgery he needed. He was so consumed by his own fear that he didn't hear the distant sound of a car engine approaching the village outskirts. The moneylender had given him a final ultimatum: pay the first half of the debt in 48 hours or lose the Golden Gates and the land they stood upon. The tension in the mansion was thick enough to cut with a knife, and the air felt heavy with the scent of an approaching storm. The night was deep and still when a lone taxi dropped Obinna at the edge of the village. He did not want a grand entrance. He wanted to walk the familiar paths and feel the soil beneath his feet. As he approached the center of the village, he stopped in his tracks. Where his father's humble hut used to stand, a massive, glowing mansion now rose toward the sky. It was more beautiful than any house he had seen abroad. Tears pricked his eyes. "I did it," he whispered, clutching his chest. "I really saved him." He walked toward the gate, but something felt strangely wrong. The village was silent, but the mansion felt cold and forbidding, like a tomb painted in bright colors. He saw the golden gates he had unknowingly paid for with his missed meals and frozen fingers. Instead of rushing in, he decided to sit on a wooden bench near the village square to gather his emotions. He wanted to enter his father's house as a son, not a stranger. As he sat there in the shadows, he saw two servants sneaking out of the back gate of the mansion, whispering urgently to each other. Obinna leaned back into the shadows of a large mango tree, his heart racing. The servants stopped just a few feet away from him, unaware of his presence. "I am leaving tonight," one whispered to the other. "Pa Joel owes me 3 months of wages. He spends every kobo the moment it arrives from his son. He is a gambler, not a chief." The other servant sighed, shaking her head. "It is a pity for that boy abroad. He sends gold, and the old man turns it into smoke at the card tables. Did you hear him yesterday? He called his son a goat who exists only to be milked. He even mocked the boy's mother, saying she raised a fool." Obinna felt as though a spear had been driven through his soul. The air left his lungs, and the world seemed to spin in circles. He sat frozen, listening to the detailed accounts of his father's feasts, the gambling debts, and the cruel jokes made at his expense. Every sacrifice he had made, the hunger, the cold, the loneliness, flashed before his eyes, now looking like a tragic joke. He realized that the man he had worshipped as a saint was actually the architect of his misery. The next morning, Obinna did not go to the mansion. Instead, he wrapped his head in a scarf and went to the village market, sitting quietly at a local stall. He listened as the women gossiped about Chief Joel. They spoke of his arrogance and how he looked down on those who were once his friends. An old neighbor, who did not recognize the thin, haggard man under the scarf, spat on the ground. "That man is a curse," the neighbor said. "His son is dying in a foreign land while Joel buys gin for strangers and loses thousands on cockfights. He has no shame." Just then, a commotion broke out. Mr. Silas, the moneylender, marched through the market with 4 armed guards. They were heading toward the mansion with a grim determination. Obinna followed at a distance, his heart like a heavy stone in his chest. When they reached the golden gates, Silas didn't knock. He kicked the gate open. The illusion of the chief was about to be shattered in front of the entire village. Obinna stood among the gathering crowd, his eyes fixed on the front door of the house he had built with his life's blood. Pa Joel stepped out onto the balcony, trying to maintain his regal posture, but his hands were shaking violently. "Silas, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" he shouted, though his voice lacked its usual power. The moneylender laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "The meaning is simple, Joel. Your time is up. You owe me more than this house is worth. I have come for my money, or I will take your clothes and leave you naked in the street." The villagers gasped, whispering to one another as the truth of the chief's debt began to spread. Pa Joel looked down at the judgmental faces of his neighbors and panicked. He pointed a finger toward the horizon, his voice becoming a desperate screech. "You cannot touch me. My son is coming. He is a billionaire. He will arrive any day and pay 10 times what I owe you. He is my son. He owes me his life. He will pay it all." He looked around, searching for someone to support his lie. His eyes swept over the crowd and stopped on a thin man in a scarf who was staring at him with a look of profound, silent grief. The silence that followed Pa Joel's outburst was deafening. The entire village turned to look at the stranger as Obinna slowly. Instead of paying the debt, Obinna spoke in a low, clear voice that reached every ear in the square. "I have no money to give, Papa. I sent it all to you. I have nothing left but the clothes on my back and the holes in my shoes." The crowd began to murmur, and the moneylender stepped closer to the father. Seeing his influence slipping away, Pa Joel's desperation turned into a sharp, poisonous anger. He leaned over the balcony, pointing a trembling finger at his son. "You useless boy! How dare you shame me like this? I raised you. I gave you life. You owe me everything. If you have no money, it is because you are lazy and spent it on yourself abroad while I suffered here." The audacity of the lie made the villagers recoil. Pa Joel continued his tirade, claiming that Obinna had always been a disappointment and that he, the father, was the only reason the family had any dignity. He mocked Obinna's thin frame, calling him a weakling who couldn't even provide for his aging parent. Unwound the scarf from his head. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. "Obinna?" an old woman whispered. The young man stepped forward, his face pale and his eyes red from unshed tears. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had been through a war. He looked at the mansion, then at the moneylender, and finally at his father. Pa Joel's face turned from a ghostly white to a deep, embarrassed purple. For a moment, hope flickered in the old man's eyes. "My son!" he cried out, his voice cracking. "You see what these people are doing to your father? They are trying to shame me. Pay this man at once. Show them how wealthy we are." The villagers watched with bated breath, expecting Obinna to reach into a bag of gold. Instead, Obinna stood perfectly still, his arms hanging limp at his sides. He looked at his father's silk robes bought with the money that should have been Obinna's dinner, and felt a coldness settle over his heart that no winter could match. The crowd was divided. Some were shocked by the father's cruelty, while others wondered if the son had indeed been irresponsible. The tension was broken by the arrival of Matsio Koro, the oldest and wisest man in the village. He walked with a heavy staff, and even the moneylender stepped back to let him through. "Enough!" the elder commanded, his voice echoing with authority. "This is no longer a private matter. This is a matter that affects the soul of our village. Truth is a river that must flow, no matter how much dirt is thrown into it." He turned to the crowd and announced that a formal gathering would be held at the village square in 1 hour. "We will hear from the son, we will hear from the father, and we will hear from the ancestors." Rumors began to fly like birds in a storm. Some said Obinna was a secret criminal, while others whispered that he had a hidden treasure buried in the forest. The father, seeing a chance to spin the narrative in his favor, began telling anyone who would listen that Obinna had stolen from him years ago. He was determined to destroy his son's reputation to save his own skin. The air was thick with the scent of a coming reckoning. The village square was packed with people by the time the sun reached its peak. Obinna stood on one side of a wooden table, and Pa Joel sat in a carved chair on the other, still trying to look like a man of importance. Matsio Koro stood between them. "Obinna," the elder said, "your father says you have failed him. He says you have kept the wealth for yourself and sent him only crumbs. What do you have to say?" Obinna did not shout or cry. He reached into his small bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were bank records and transfer slips, meticulously saved for 7 years. He began to read them aloud, date by date, amount by amount. January, $500. February, $500. Every single cent I earned. Gasps filled the marketplace as the total was calculated. In the people's heads, it was a fortune, enough to buy 5 mansions and 10 farms. The villagers looked at the slips of paper, which were stained with Obinna's sweat and tears. The evidence was undeniable. But as the crowd turned their eyes toward Pa Joel, Obinna raised his hand. "Wait," he said softly. "The biggest revelation is not about the money." Before Obinna could continue, a small voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "I have something to say." It was Namdi, the young boy who had been hiding in the shadows of the mansion weeks ago. He stepped into the center of the circle, his legs shaking but his voice clear. He looked directly at Pa Joel, who tried to glare him into silence. "I heard him," Namdi said, pointing at the father. "I heard him tell the men at the gate that Obinna was just a goat. He said he would milk him until he was dead. He said he didn't care if Obinna was hungry, as long as he had gin and cards." The boy repeated the father's cruelest jokes. word for word, including the insults about Obinna's late mother. The marketplace fell into a deathly silence. The villagers who had laughed with Pa Joel now looked at their feet in shame. The chief tried to stand, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "He is lying. He is just a child," he screamed. But the truth was already out, vibrating in the air like a struck bell. The crowd's sympathy shifted entirely, flowing toward the sun like a tidal wave. Seeing that he had lost the crowd, Mr. Silas, the moneylender, stepped forward to deliver the final blow. He opened his own ledger and began reading the father's gambling debts. 2 million for a lost cockfight, 5 million for a card game in the city, 3 million for imported furniture that was never paid for. He turned to the village elders. "This man has nothing, the mansion, the land, even the chair he is sitting on. They all belong to me now because of his greed." Pa Joel collapsed back into his chair, his breath coming in ragged sobs. The illusion of the chief shattered completely, leaving behind a pathetic, broken old man who had traded his son's love for a few years of hollow pride. The guards stepped forward to begin the process of seizing the property. The villagers began to jeer, throwing insults at the man they had once called a king. "Deceiver!" they shouted. "Greedy father!" Pa Joel looked around in desperation, his eyes landing on Obinna. He reached out a trembling hand. "My son, please, do not let them take my home. Do not let them shame me further. I am your father." The fallen chief was a sight of pure misery. His expensive lace robe was torn at the shoulder, and his eyes were wide with a terror that no amount of money could soothe. The villagers, once his loyal subjects in the court of palm wine, now formed a circle of scorn around him. "Where is your golden son now, Joel?" someone shouted from the back. "Where is the goat you were going to milk?" The respect and influence he had built on a foundation of lies vanished in a single afternoon. His titles were stripped away by the whispers of the elders, and the servants he had mistreated walked away without looking back. Pa Joel fell to his knees in the dust of the marketplace, sobbing and clutching at Obinna's tattered trousers. "I was foolish. The money blinded me," he wailed. "Save me, Obinna. If they take the house, I will die in the cold. You are a good son. Remember your promise." The moneylender waited with an impatient scowl, his hand on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger, ready to take possession of everything. The entire village fell silent, waiting for the son's reaction to this ultimate betrayal. Obinna looked down at the man who had caused him years of suffering. He saw the greed, the cruelty, and the weakness, but he also saw the father who had once held his hand when he was a small boy. The crowd expected a grand speech of revenge. They expected Obinna to spit on the man or to walk away and let the moneylender throw him into the street. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Matsi Okoro stepped forward, his eyes searching Obinna's face. "The law of the village says a son must honor his father," the elder said softly. "But the law of the heart says a man must reap what he sows. Obinna, the decision of what happens to this man and this wealth lies with you. What is your word?" Obinna took a deep breath, his chest expanding as if he were finally breathing in the air of freedom. He looked at the mansion that stood as a monument to his pain, then at the villagers who were hungry for a spectacle. He didn't look angry. He looked remarkably, terrifyingly calm. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope that he had been carrying since he landed. "I have one more truth to tell," Obinna said, his voice steady. "I knew the city abroad was dangerous. I knew that even a father could be tempted. So, every year I secretly saved 5% of my earnings in a separate account that no one knew about. I did not spend it on myself. I invested it in a small property firm in the city." He opened the envelope and showed the papers to the elders. The investments had grown significantly over the 7 years. Obinna was not a beggar. He was actually wealthier than the chief had ever been. The villagers gasped, their eyes wide with wonder. Pa Joel's eyes lit up with a sudden, sickening hope. He started to stand up, a greedy smile touching his lips. "You have more money? Oh, my wonderful son. I knew you were brilliant. Pay the man, and let us go back to our mansion and feast." He reached for the envelope, but Obinna pulled it back, his gaze turning as cold as the winters he had endured. "The money is not for you, Papa. It was never for you. It was for the promise I made to my mother to protect our name." Obinna turned to Mr. Silas, the moneylender. "I will pay my father's debts in full," he said, and the crowd let out a roar of surprise. "But on one condition. The mansion and the land will not belong to me, and they will certainly not belong to my father. From this day forward, the title will be held in trust by the village elders." He looked at the magnificent building. "This house was built with the blood of a son and the lies of a father. Let it be cleansed. It will no longer be a palace for one man's pride. It will be turned into a school for all the children of this village, so that no boy like Namdi will ever have to hide in the shadows for a scrap of food." The villagers erupted into cheers, some even weeping with joy. Pa Joel's face fell as if he had been struck. "And my father?" Obinna asked the elder. "He will live in the small hut at the back of the school. He will work every day, sweeping the floors and tending the garden for the children." When loyalty is broken and the heart is crushed, does forgiveness make a man stronger, or does it make him weaker? The children looked at the school, then at the humble old man sweeping the porch, and then at the sun who stood tall against the horizon. The village continues to debate the answer to this day, but they all agree on one thing. A river that forgets its source will surely run dry. Do you think it was right to make his father go punished and mocked? Drop your comments in the comment section so others can learn from the story and see your perspectives. And if you are just watching my story for the first time, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share for more family betrayal stories, secrets, justice, and success.